Okay, let's get started. Thank you for joining us on this cold day. My name is Tina Thomas, and I am the CEO of the Edmonton Community Foundation. Again, thank you for joining us for the launch of the 2022 Vital Signs Report. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered today on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route of the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. Together, we acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. A special welcome to the dignitaries and honored guests that have joined us today. All levels of government were invited to attend this morning, but as you can imagine, it is a very busy time and the weather is not great. So we know not everyone who wanted to come was able to make it, but some of you could. So thank you, MLA David Shepherd, MLA Marlon Schmidt, and MLA Janice Irwin for taking the time to be with us, as well as those who are here representing MPs, councillors, and MLAs who are not able to attend today. I believe budget deliberation is happening right behind us. So you've all, including me, made a much better choice to join us here. For the past 10 years, ECF has been producing Vital Signs in partnership with the Edmonton Social Planning Council. As someone who has used Vital Signs in my previous work at the Edmonton Public Library, I know the research that is provided here is often hard to get because it provides a very unique local perspective. And that helps all Edmontonians and organizations that serve Edmontonians have more information to provide those services. This year, our Vital Signs report looked at systemic racism in Edmonton, which I am sure you can imagine was complicated and sometimes challenging. But our goal is to help us all better understand the current landscape so we can make changes that benefit all Edmontonians. Vital Signs is a national initiative led by the Community Foundations of Canada. It provides an annual snapshot of a variety of indicators in communities across the country. More than 65 community foundations across Canada and 41 around the world participate in Vital Signs in some way each year. We hope you take the time to read our report, think about it, learn something new about you and your community. Share it with others, engage in conversation, and let it inspire you to take action. I'd like to now welcome Susan Morrissey, Executive Director with the Edmonton Social Planning Council, to talk a little bit more about this year's report and the committee that has dedicated so many, many hours to making this project possible. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. And thank you, Tina, very much. It's been a pleasure to start a new journey working with you as well at ECF and on this really wonderful project that we've been doing. As Tina mentioned, the focus of this year's Vital Signs report was systemic racism in Edmonton. In this year's report, we covered the history of racism in Edmonton, housing, safety, and mental health, education, income, and employment inequality, and civic engagement, although we could have included much more if we didn't have a page count limit in any of the work that we did. There's lots of information out there, folks. However, the process and the resulting report is a bit different in 2022 than in previous years. Many of you probably have already picked up a copy of the report at the back of the room, and that's fantastic. However, the report process revealed just how lacking the data is when it comes to race-based data and who is and who isn't represented in the data. So we actually also have a QR code set up as well for people if you want to go and access information online as well through that. So as a result of the lack of data in certain places and the information, we had to rely heavily on our advisory committee to help provide context, fill gaps, and guide the information in the report so that we could paint an accurate picture as possible as the information was available. I'd like to acknowledge all the committee members who have dedicated their time in making sure we are focusing on the most current and pressing issues in this topic, and for the incredible, thoughtful conversation had throughout the process to ensure we did our best to not leave anyone out of the picture. And let me tell you, we had some pretty incredible discussions and meetings. I was talking with Lucinia a little bit earlier today. We'd go into a meeting and it would be, oh, see how this is going to go, which just speaks to how challenging this issue is, but also speaks to how important it is that we are talking about it and having those conversations and presenting. Our steering committee included myself and NECA Adabulu from the Edmonton Community Foundation as co-chairs. Sydney Sheloff, Brett Lambert, Jenna Robinson, and they were all on the Edmonton Social Planning Council staff, and Shireen Zink from the Edmonton Community Foundation. And let me tell you, this planning committee met long and hard many times to make sure that we were able to get this right. Now, our advisory committee is made up of who we think are the key experts in the community. So we had Eric Abbotman from End Poverty Edmonton. We had Taylor Soroka, Jasper Place Wellness Center, Hardinger Clark from the Government of Alberta, Bukala Salami from the University of Alberta, Lucinia Ortez, community member, Ellie Denavi from Norquest, Sam Singh from Shift Lab, Funki Olakudi from Ribbon Rouge Foundation, Adora Nofor, and she's with Black Lives Matters in Calgary, Lloyd Cardinal, Indigenous Leadership, Betty Latondra, who is an elder, Giri Puligandli from Canadian Mental Health Association, Dunia Nur from the African Canadian Civic Engagement Council, Trent Daly from the Islamic Family and Social Service Association, and Alom Deng from the African Canadian Civic Engagement Council. Special thank you to our advisory committee. The insight that all of you brought to the table was incredible. And I have to honestly say, I learned so much from each and every one of you. It is my pleasure now to introduce MLA David Shepherd, and he is going to come up and speak for a few minutes about some anti-racism work that he's doing and a private member's bill. David.
Well, thank you so much, Susan. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the constituency of Edmonton City Centre, snowy and cold as it may be. It is an honor to be here this morning to recognize this wonderful work that's being done by ECF and the Edmonton Social Planning Council. Deeply appreciate the work that each of them do to address inequalities that are experienced by racialized communities. And we recognize that that is in fact the case. We know systemic racism is real. People of Indigenous or people who are Indigenous, Black, Asian, South Asian, people of color have a very different experience of our world, of many of the systems that govern and affect our lives than others. And it's incredibly important that we as legislators consider that and address those inequalities when we are putting forward systems, programs, legislation. But there is a challenge in doing so. This is a gap, unfortunately, that has to be filled then by folks like the ECF and the ESPC. And it's incredibly important that they do this work, and I appreciate the reports that they both bring forward to help inform the work we do. But, you know, I had a chance to talk with Brett and Sydney, who were a couple of the researchers on this project, and I asked them, how much of the data that went into this report were you able to find here in Alberta? And what they told me is not much at all. It was incredibly difficult for them to find the data for this report from actual Albertans of color, Indigenous, Black, and other people of color who live here in our province, because that data is not collected. So back in 2020, after the murder of George Floyd in the States, we had an opportunity open up for some much broader conversations around, say, racism and systemic racism. So our caucus embarked on a multi-month conversation with racialized Albertans to talk about what they were experiencing in all of the areas under the provincial government purview. So health, education, the social support system, economic opportunities, and democratic engagement. A lot like what we see in this report today. We published the results of that report. You can find it if you like at albertasfuture.ca. It's called Your Future, Your Voice. But one of the top things that came out in every one of those conversations was the need to collect race-based data here in the province of Alberta. And as government, we have an enormous opportunity to do that. We have a number of different systems where we interact with people, the healthcare system, the education system, social support, so many, where we could be collecting data that could be used to address systemic racism and inequality. So earlier this year, I put forward a private member's bill, the Anti-Racism Act, which laid out what I thought was a thoughtful framework to begin the work towards the collection of race-based data in Alberta. I recognize that that is something that is not easily implemented. It requires a good deal of consultation with community, with Indigenous communities in particular, recognizing the unique position that they hold as the original peoples on this land and under treaty, but also with all other communities of color. So the bill mandated that process of consultation to create a set of standards for that collection. Now, unfortunately, that bill was not accepted in the legislature. It was not given the chance for debate. However, the government has committed that at least within 3 years, they may begin to move forward on that work. That's something that we're certainly going to continue to bring forward. I think there's a number of folks at the legislature who still feel this is important so that the kind of work we see in this report today can be broadened, can be Alberta specific, so that we can work at all levels of government and across community to address the kind of inequities that this report helps highlight. So thank you again to everybody who's part of that. It's wonderful to see this advisory committee, so many names I recognize, who are out there doing such great work in our communities. Thank you to the ECF, to the Edmonton Social Planning Council for bringing their voices forward, for adding this to our conversation and giving us as legislators this excellent resource to inform our work. Have a great morning.
Thank you very, very much, MLA Shepherd. Thank you for coming and speaking today and sharing with us. And wouldn't it be great if we didn't have to go outside of the realm of our province to be able to find some of this data? Well, I have a distinct pleasure now to introduce our guest speaker for today. It's Lloyd Cardinal. Lloyd is Cree from Wolf Creek, Alberta, of both Treaty and Métis ancestry, and his family comes from the Eagle clan. I have known and worked with Lloyd for approximately 5 years now. Most of the work has been through End Poverty Edmonton on the Stewardship Roundtable. When I first found out that Lloyd had agreed to speak today, I was simply thrilled. Lloyd brings experience, he brings knowledge, and he brings very, very keen observation to the conversations that he's involved in. And I've learned so much from him. Every time he opens his mouth, I close my mouth and I open my ears, because there is a real richness in what Lloyd speaks to experience, speaks to knowledge, and he speaks to truth. You may not know, but Lloyd is a drummer and has drummed at many ceremonies and events in the city. He is a drum keeper. He makes powwow and hand drums, and he is a member of the Niwak Singers. And I remember seeing through the media that you actually drummed when the Pope was here. So please join me in welcoming Lloyd Cardinal to come and share with you.
Okay, yes, thank you for the introduction, Susanna. Tansei, Mio Kikse Payao, Lloyd Cardinal, Netsika Sun, Mahikan Sagaigan, and Amisk Sagaigan Otsinia. Tatamskad Nawa. I'll translate what I said. I said hello. I said good morning. I said, my name is Lloyd Cardinal, and I come from Wolf Lake. And I also come from the Beaver Lake Cree Nation, Treaty 6. And I'm basically shaking all of your hands with my voice, Tatamskat now. And I'd like to start off today by thanking the Creator first for another day of life. And I will share some teachings with you from my people. And these teachings were given to our people 19 generations ago. I usually say them as a prayer, but I'll just share the teachings with you today. Friend, do it in this way, that is, that whatever you do in life, do the very best that you can with both your heart and mind. And when you do it in this way, the power of the universe will come to your assistance if your heart and your mind are in unity. When one sits at the hoop of the people, one must be responsible because all of creation is related. And the hurt of one is the hurt of all. And the honor of one is the honor of all. And whatever we do affects everything in the universe. If you do it in this way, if you truly join your heart and your mind as one, whatever you ask for, that's the way it's going to be. Now I'll say in my language now, Naskumtanao, Notawinan, Naskamao, Semantu. I'd like to just start off today by saying that I cannot speak on behalf of all Indigenous people due to the diversity that exists amongst us, acknowledging that there are 48 First Nations in our province, 500 nations across the land that we call Great Turtle Island, but I can speak on behalf of myself, an Indigenous person. I'd like to thank the Edmonton Community Foundation for making this launch possible today, and all the participants who shared their knowledge and input about this important issue. Today, I want to speak to you about the disenfranchised Indigenous peoples. I am one of them, and there are many more like me within our municipality. I have a concern about the accuracy of data collection and how it's collected when it comes to Indigenous people in an urban context. When First Peoples are off reserve and away from their homelands or settlements, and they are urban, the federal and provincial governments do not honor their obligation to support them financially. Then the responsibility falls upon the municipality, and they are not able to deal with the reality. I'm talking about what we see in the inner city, what we see when we walk outside of this building, the reality. If you look at our inner city, statistics say that Indigenous peoples are overrepresented in the homeless population, making up more than 50%. I've worked in the inner city for years, and I've noticed that these statistics are incorrect. I have a colleague who's an executive director for an organization that serves this demographic, and he stated to me that the peoples that access services from their organization are 80, if not 90% Indigenous. If you want to understand Indigenous homelessness, which is a slow genocide, you first have to know and understand the history of this land and the impacts of colonization. To name a few examples, in our city, in the 1940s, Indigenous people were not allowed to gather in groups of 12. For if they organized, if they were caught in these groups of 12, they'd be put in prison. You know, one place that actually supported Indigenous people gathering and organizing was the Bissell Center. They used to operate on a spiritual level in community, and there's a table upstairs. And this table's like from the early 1900s, late 1800s. And you know what, this table, Indigenous people gathered and brought forth their grievances there, and they actually amended the Indian Act in that place. And a lot of people don't know that we weren't allowed to be in groups of 12 here in our city, right? See, another thing too, the first Indigenous person to vote in Canada, 1960, right? 1960. I went and I voted in the last election, and you know what? I met some electoral officers, and I explained to them that we weren't allowed to vote until 1960. But first I asked the question, do you know when the first Indigenous person voted in Canada? And then they said to me, 1917 or something, they said. And I said, well, actually it was 1960. And you know what? Those electoral officers, they looked at me and they said, that's wrong, right? That's wrong. And in order to vote, they had to give up their treaty status. And you know what? I just named a few examples here because I could keep on going on and on and on about the injustices that my people have faced in our community, our city, our province, our country, right? I'd like to acknowledge that the data collected is old and outdated. One of the things that I noticed about the data that was collected is that it came from 2015. I'm not an expert when it comes to data, but you know what? I do understand that there was new census data that was to be released in the fall. But a lot of this data is old and outdated, and a lot of things have changed since 2015. Indigenous people are the fastest growing population in Canada. In this city, we are the second of all cities across Canada. With so many of our urban First Peoples being disenfranchised, they are disconnected from inherent Indigenous rights and treated by our society as if they don't have any rights at all. So how can statistics be correct when it comes to First Peoples in an urban context? Like me, they blow around in the wind without identity, without culture, without a connection to their ancestors, in a sense. I was asked to come up here and share my lived experience, and I'm just going to share a quick story with you now. And you know what? This is just my story, and there are many, many other Indigenous groups out there that have similar stories, but I will share mine with you today. I originally come from a place called Wolf Lake. You know what? I grew up there. We hunted, we trapped, we lived off the land. I was raised by my grandfather, my Muslim Isidore. He was a bushman. My grandfather was born across the lake. My dad was born across the lake. So if you think about it, my generation is the only generation to be born in the hospital. Before that, they were all Nehiyawak. They were all Indians, right? We grew up out there with my grandfather, but on May 6, 1960, the lands and the rights were rescinded and taken from the people. And you know what? The people were forced off of the land that day. They were forced off of the land that day. And from what I was told, it was by our government, right? But at the same time, when they were told to leave, they were told to take what they could, but you couldn't take everything with you. Now go, right? My grandfather, who served in World War II, said no to them, and he bought his fenced quarter section of land. Up north of the lake, all of my grandfathers had trap lines where they were 6 miles by 6 miles. They were crown agreements. They couldn't take these from them. So you know what my grandfather did? He stayed, but many other people in our community were displaced. Some of them went up to East Prairie. Some of them went to Onion Lake. Some of them went to Saddle Lake. That's why I'm related to, all of Saddle Lake. Everywhere I go, I have all these relatives and I meet them like on a regular basis, just participating in community. My elder and my boss, a visionary, Elder Betty Latender, we worked together and we met each other, and we learned that we are both from Wolf Lake. We didn't know that until we worked with each other. So, Alberta is the only province that recognizes land-based Métis, right? And you know what? There used to be 12 Métis settlements. And now I think there's, if somebody can six, 8. So there are 8 Métis settlements. And you know, the interesting thing is that this is why we're in the city. This is why, you know, we've faced homelessness. This is why our people face poverty, is because land was taken from our people. And this is how I ended up in the city. And there are many, many other Indigenous people in our city that have faced the same reality. I just want to also state to everybody that we are a strong and beautiful and resilient people. And that we are not victims, we are survivors. And we're still kind and loving, man, to all people. And you know what? I welcome all people to our beautiful homeland. I'm going to read off a couple of suggestions. And I participate in circles. If anybody wants to further conversations after that, you can definitely connect with us. The idea that I want to raise is that people use the word race. There's no such thing as a race. And using this word legitimizes the racist concept that we should talk about data, which helps us see how racism is functioning and plan anti-racism. The other point is that about the Edmonton Police Commission recently voting to support race identity labels on drivers. As a way to gather that data, we should stand against this in every way. Labeling us with races is furthering racism. Data needs to be generated in safe, trusting, discrete places that protect the dignity of a person so that it can be used to understand racism and plan anti-racism. I also want to say too, as Indigenous people, you guys are very aware of the medicine wheel. And there's 4 colors that are represented within a circle. This is knowledge that comes from this land. It goes back thousands of years. And there are 4 colors represented within the medicine wheel. And you know what? A lot of people teach that there's 4 races within that wheel. You know what? I have an elder and a guy that he's kind of like my Obi-Wan Kenobi. He guides me and teaches me the Jedi ways, right? You know what he said to me? He doesn't see 4 races represented in that wheel. You know what he sees? The human race. One race, and guess what? We have to work together. Right? The last thing I'm going to read to you, which I was supposed to read at the beginning, is something that was given to me by a friend. His name is Michael Fair. He used to be a city councillor. We're sitting at a circle. And it's a couple of words with their definitions from a dictionary. Belonging. From the Old English langian, to go along with, to pertain to, from late 14th century meaning, to be a member of, Germanic origin. 1, the fundamental human need to be a part of something larger. 2, once understood as a necessity for survival, now a sign of psychological well-being. 3, thrives on cooperative sharing and balanced relationships with others. 4, a necessary ingredient for social, cultural, political, and economic resilience. 5, I belong, therefore I can. Multiculturalism, noun, from the Latin multis, much, many, cultura, growing, cultivation. 1, an Indigenous concept that balances difference with belonging. 2, a policy devised to explain how people from culturally distinct and diverse backgrounds can live together. 3, a Canadian invention supporting, in theory at least, notions of equality, rights, recognition, and opportunity for all, regardless of their roots. So with that, I thank you guys for listening to me today. And I just want to end with saying that you don't have to believe me, eh? You know what? Think critically. You've been given a mind. Think for yourself, right? And what I share with you, I give to you. And thank you for listening to me now. Thank you. Bye.
Wow. Thank you, Lloyd. All I have to say is thank you very much for speaking from the heart. It's now my privilege to introduce to you another one of our advisory committee members who is going to come and speak and share with you the calls to action that were proposed out of the report. Every year we've done a vital signs report. At the end of the report, we always include in something there that, and you, in reading this document, what can you do? How can you contribute to the solution? And so I asked, and actually the calls to action came specifically from our advisory committee members this year. So I'd like to ask Alum Deng to come forward and present our calls to action.
Thank you. So this is my first time speaking to a large crowd, so just bear with me if I'm a little nervous. I see familiar faces, so I'll try and feel at home. So the first question that comes to mind, at least to me, when we consume data and information about marginalized communities is, what can I do, right? We're often thinking, am I the right person to raise awareness about this? Can I really bring change about it? A lot of us feel uncomfortable. We feel scared and intimidated. The calls to action that we're going to share today are guidance to those exploring these questions. Stakeholders from diverse backgrounds contributed their perspectives on how Edmontonians, government, and organizations can mobilize in order to empower their communities. I hope today's Vital Signs launch and calls to action will inspire each of us to reflect and to do our part in mobilizing to bring positive change to Alberta's capital city, Edmonton. We sometimes forget that we're the capital, but we really have the opportunity to lead our province. Our first call to action is, we are all treaty people. This is something, if we all reflect on and carry with us each and every day, can really transform all of our relationships. We encourage you to participate and engage in Indigenous-led events, workshops that strengthen your capacity to be an ally. Recently, I got the opportunity to learn what an ally is from an elder. Her name is Heather, and I'm not going to attempt to say her last name because I want to be respectful and not say it incorrectly, but Elder Heather really inspired us into thinking about what allyship is from the perspective that it is friendship. So how can you be a friend to our Indigenous brothers and sisters and people of Two Spirits? So for me, thinking of allyship from that perspective really gives me the opportunity to be, okay, how can I make sure, how will this influence my friends? How will this impact my friends? Is this something that my friends will like? Is this something that will support my friends in their community? There's lots of great resources available, such as the Center for Race and Culture. They always offer a lot of workshops that are accessible that you can participate and engage in. There's a lot of free courses as well, and a lot of great documentaries that are accessible through the Edmonton Public Library or even through post-secondary institutions. The second is to attend and engage in at least one community town hall. So this is things like this, which increases your civic engagement and helps you to understand what's happening in communities that you might not otherwise be able to engage and interact with. Lastly, volunteer and support racially diverse grassroots initiatives and organizations. A lot of the changes that are happening are within the smaller communities and those grassroots initiatives that don't really get the opportunity to engage with all of Edmontonians. So if we actively seek them out and participate and support them with just showing up, with just listening, volunteering our time, we would all be able to do our part in bringing positive change to Edmonton. Thank you.
Thank you, Alum. You did a great job. Thank you for reminding us that the information in the report is just the first step. If we actually want to make change, we have to take some actions. I want to thank MLA Shepherd, who had to leave, for sharing his insights, but I also want to say, Lloyd, I appreciate what you said. You reminded us of the importance of interconnection. And if we are interconnected, what happens when another group is harmed? And so then what is our responsibility when we hear things like there is a slow genocide happening? Those are things that will stick with me. So thank you for sharing that insight. Please don't forget that you can get a copy of Vital Signs at ecfoundation.org or the Edmonton Social Planning Council's website. I want to thank you all for joining us today. And I want to remind you that there are refreshments. So please stay, talk with each other, learn a little bit more about people's contributions to the report, their input into it, what they think about it, and enjoy some refreshments while you do it. Thank you for joining us.